Romanticism in Western Europe, a 19th century art history presentation. In this presentation, we will cover Choose Chapter 7, the video on Turner, Choose Chapter 8, Picard's article called Nietzsche as Masked Romantic, and Choose Chapter 9. Chapter 7. Germany in 18th century Europe did not yet exist as a political power. Germany was divided into hundreds of principalities and free cities. A lack of unity within its region allowed Napoleon to conquer and then reorganize the area into the German Federation. Although politically and economically weak, the German Federation excelled in music, philosophy, and literature, and conceived of a new intellectual orientation, Romanticism. To them, Romanticism was a state of mind wherein spirituality, emotion, and faith were valued over the neoclassical structures of order, imitation, and rationality. Goethe, a philosopher and writer, forged a link between the medieval period, Gothic architecture, Christianity, emotions, and nature, and what it meant to be a German. Nazarenes Friedrich Overbeck and Franz Pohr were the first artists to manifest German Romanticism and make art for Christian inspiration. Peter Cornelius revived religious painting, but did not evolve with the same emphasis of incorporating landscape and the natural world the way other artists of the Romantic movement did. Adverse to classical art considering it pagan, Cornelius focused primarily on transforming Nazarene artwork to reflect biblical stories of the Old and New Testament. Philipp Otto Runge introduced the use of natural phenomena and its forms to be imbued with spiritual meaning and symbolism. For him, landscapes and nature are fraught with significance, but they are not the sole carriers of meaning in his work. In his paintings, Caspar David Friedrich isolates landscapes as a true messenger of substance. Influenced by pastor and poet Ludwig Kosegarten, who said having a personal experience with nature, God's creation, will lead to a greater understanding of the divine, Friedrich believed that every artist had to look within and find his own way. Friedrich felt that art was at the center of the world, at the center of the highest spiritual order. His artwork comprises the main components of Romanticism: subjectivity, individualism, spirituality, and the love of nature. German Romanticism in art altered reality, utilizing the landscape, creativity, and imagination to reveal a subject's spiritual essence by embracing nature as a manifestation of the Creator, displaying universality and human emotions in direct opposition to the orderly, rational, neoclassical statutes based on imitation, the notion of ideal beauty, and the pagan beliefs held by the ancient Greeks. Nietzsche as masked romantic. The period of Romanticism was bewildering. It is a period where individualism and emotional connection were celebrated, and the art traditions of the past were also glorified. The written history of Romanticism is confusing in its described characteristics. On one hand, the movement is described as a time of growth and transformation. On the other hand, it is described as being full of pessimism and extreme skepticism. Romanticism had a distinct light and dark side. Nietzsche's position seemed inconsistent at times. In his early writings, he was optimistic and interested in aesthetic principles and beauty. He ridiculed the hypocrisy of the Romantic society and found them intolerable in their ambiguity. Yet he wrote ruthlessly in protest of all traditional dogmas of morality, especially in regard to Christianity and democracy. His famous quote, "God is dead," made a bold statement about his belief that reason should guide our actions and not blame what happens on a God. Yet he ridiculed anti-Semites and Darwinism. The tone of his later writings was adversarial, full of pessimism and misogyny. He loathed what he considered the fake power of women with their intoxicating sensuality and beauty, and advocated their dismissal from the serious affairs of men. The Romantic movement has what Nietzsche referred to in his book Beyond Good and Evil as having two faces. Two Romantic painters who illustrate these two aspects are Caspar David Friedrich and Eugene Delacroix. The dubious sides of Romantic art plagued and also inspired Nietzsche as a philosopher. Friedrich was considered the embodiment of Romanticism. His Monk by the Sea was first exhibited in 1810 in Berlin with great celebrity. With its break from the principles of antique art, the painting exhibited a passion and emotion with a powerful yet bare landscape and a fog-obscured subject of a monk showing humble emotion, all new in Romanticism by depicting more nature. Friedrich's Cross in the Mountains was unique in its depiction with nature. It was finished in 1807 and first viewed the following year in a private showing. It was a well-defined foreground image against an obtruse background. This was considered a controversial act against academic classicism and ecclesiastic art. Friedrich made the elaborate frame himself as part of the design. Although it was commissioned as a centerpiece of a private family's altar, it was never placed there. Nietzsche criticized any sensuality of theme or depiction of any transformation of nature. Eugene Delacroix depicts the darker side of the Romantic era. He was known during this time for his use of color. The Massacres at Chios was finished in 1824 and exhibited in the Paris Salon the same year. It caused a pandemonium. He created a depiction of light and half-tones, and again, as with Friedrich, used the scumbling technique. Scumbling goes against the classical form of outlining to enhance the subject. Delacroix's diary entry said, "It needs the darkness, the desirable dirtiness, the special lens, the smile on the dying face, the final embraces of despairing beings. This is the true domain of painting." Delacroix called The Death of Sardanapalus his Massacre No. 2. He finished it in 1824 and was exhibited in the Paris Salon the same year. The critics vilified it as a scandalous massacre of painting itself. The painting depicts the slaughter of all things pleasurable to the crown prince of Babylon, his harem, servants, horses, and dogs. He committed suicide after his brother defeated him in war and ordered his soldiers to kill all things that brought him pleasure. The painting is bold in color and detail of riches and wealth. Nietzsche and Delacroix shared some of the same values for the destruction of modernity and the bitterness toward women. In conclusion, as with the Romanticism movement itself, Nietzsche had many faces in his treatment of commentary, criticism, and theory. Chapter 8. The Grand Tour was a formal trip that emphasized major historical sites of continental Europe. For the artists and aristocrats of 18th century Great Britain, Italy was the most popular destination. The ideals and design of classical antiquity and Italian Renaissance architect Andrea Palladio were appreciated because they implied good taste. Visitors were encouraged to look around England's naturalistic gardens and see picturesque views suitable for painting. Seeking out the picturesque in the British countryside became very popular when the French Revolution ended the Grand Tour in 1789. The British showed an interest in sketching and painting their countryside and appreciated travel books that pointed out the composition, texture, and lighting found in nature. the British countryside and these views were said to mimic the landscape paintings of the 17th century French artist Claude Lorraine. The landscape of Great Britain changed immensely due to the Industrial Revolution, and citizens sought rejuvenation and inspiration in nature, and also through the paintings and prints that depicted it. The English artist Thomas Girton contributed topographical landscapes that celebrated classical architecture to enhance the picturesque view. British artists used watercolor paints to sketch out a landscape painting. Watercolor paints were produced in London, and due to their portability, they complemented outdoor painting and the commercial arts. Watercolor paints, as well as landscape painting, were not held in high esteem at the Royal Academy in London. Two students in particular felt strongly about the value of landscape painting, and through their unconventional application of paint, they ushered in modern painting techniques. One artist was John Constable. He tried to render the landscape naturalistically in his pastoral scenes. In The Hay Wain of 1821, John Constable rendered nature's harmony and purity in a bucolic scene that Londoners found too sentimental. Nonetheless, Constable used dabs of oil paint in pure color in his outside studies. His technique would be influential 50 years later as artists explored visual perception. The other artist, Joseph Mallard William Turner, would also be an innovator in lighting and technique. He was quite talented and showed versatility, but he favored the sublime in his landscape paintings, much like other artists of the Romantic era. He painted the land, sea, and sky as powerful. He was interested in using the natural elements as a way to impart emotion, and through this goal, his work unwittingly revealed abstraction. In conclusion, the British countryside was popular in landscape painting and commercial arts of the 1700s as industrialization changed the landscape and created a desire for the intellectual engagement and peace nature could offer. Now let's look at the Turner video. Early on in his life, Joseph Mallard William Turner learned to love exploring the world. He would sketch with watercolors as he traveled, and he showed very good artistic talent even from a young age. At age 14, in late 1789, Turner entered the Royal Academy schools in London, and by age 26, he was a professor of perspective. The Academy would teach young artists how to establish professionalism through education and exhibitions. Here he would learn the art of oil painting. Turner admired the Dutch master's seascapes, and he also admired the Academy's first president, Joshua Reynolds, because he spoke of intelligence in painting. In his first Academy exhibition in 1796, Turner painted a moving nocturnal seascape employing dramatic moonlight. The image investigates the raw power and emotion of nature. While he benefited from exhibiting paintings through the Academy, he also secured patrons through his own private shows at his home. Turner used his one-man exhibits to show paintings that were riskier than what the Academy expected. The sublime, or the relationship between human beings and the various sides of nature, were popular in painting during the Romantic era and suited Turner's expressive style well. Turner used his media unconventionally. He would smear the paint around on a surface to build layers and create an intensely emotionally charged atmospheric background. Turner wanted landscape painting to be taken more seriously than it was. He would investigate and explore elements of nature as a way to communicate emotional content in popular subject matter. Here, the churning sea destroys everything, including the men thrown overboard. The use of the color red and the motion in the sea and sky add to their demise. Nature was so important that he would remove any human presence and emphasize only the sublime of the natural world. He believed nature contained intelligent truths, and he pursued these through his manipulation of light, color, and texture. In his later work, Turner presents the viewer with a vortex arrangement that brings the viewer right into the storm. Turner is on the cusp of modernism. Joseph Mallord William Turner was influenced and compared to others, like Claude Lorrain of France. Yet Turner was more experimental and willing to explore emotion. He died in 1860 after a fulfilling career. His landscapes and seascapes became increasingly expressionistic, and he laid the groundwork for impressionism and abstraction. In conclusion, Turner's interest in the power found in nature propelled him to constantly investigate the contributions of light and color to inform the viewer of the emotional narrative. Chapter 9. The Restoration Period and the Rejection of Classicism in France. After Napoleon's Grand Army was drastically reduced, he was deposed and exiled to Elba in 1814. Louis XVIII became King of France until 1824, and he was succeeded by his brother Charles X. The period of their regimes was called the Restoration Period. The Salons of the Restoration Period. The Salons were held every 2 years in the Louvre. During the Restoration period, previously featured paintings glorifying Napoleon were replaced by paintings that showed the virtuous Bourbons. Like the Academy, the Salons were dominated by followers of David in the classical tradition until 1819, when young artists started to paint in a style to be known as Romantic. Madame de Staël wrote a book titled Germany in 1810, which was banned by Napoleon, but it was widely read and was very popular. She categorized Europe into 2 groups, a romantic Germanic Christian north and a classical Mediterranean pagan south. A French writer, Henry Bale, who used the German pen name Stendhal, was inspired by de Staël. He did not see it necessary for Romanticism to return to a medieval Christianity. He called for modern painters to renounce the naked body and rather paint pictures that would appeal to the greater number of people. Together, Stendhal and de Staël gave artists 2 options in pursuing art: to return to the medieval and post-medieval past of Northern Europe, or to become enthusiastically engaged in modern times. We will now examine 4 artists from this genre: Horace Vernet, Theodore Géricault, Eugène Delacroix, and Jean-Auguste Dominique Ingres. Horace Vernet. To Stendhal, Vernet was the most outstanding representative of France's new art. All 40 of the works he submitted to the jury of the Salon were exhibited in 1824. We see a shift in style which resulted in his Battle of Montmirail in 1822. The battle is a contemporary theme at a visceral level. It was not used to educate and edify the viewer by means of moralizing subjects and ideal forms. Here there is no single hero. Theodore Géricault studied under Guérin and reached artistic maturity at the fall of the Napoleon Empire. He only displayed 3 works at the Salons of 1812, 14, and 19. His engagement with the present was more philosophical, and he explored the tragedies of modern life. Géricault's last submission to the Salon was also his best-known work, The Raft of the Medusa of 1819. Even though it depicts a contemporary event, it is more in the classical style of centering on the male nudes. The painting was inspired by the running aground off the west coast of Africa of the French frigate the Medusa in the summer of 1816, which was transporting colonists and soldiers to Senegal, and it became a symbol of France, a country adrift for lack of a competent leader. A current event like this had never been the subject of monumental art. This is contrasted to Napoleonic art, which glorified the ruler of the heroic battle scenes rather than depicting facts. The sinking of the Medusa's ship was neither an important historical event nor a propaganda opportunity. It was an isolated episode involving common people such as farmers, soldiers, and sailors. Jericho reduced the size of the raft to add drama and to accommodate only the 15 survivors depicted. The composition is in a climactic triangle form, leading the viewer to view tragedy first on the lower left and lead the viewer's eye up to the right where there is hope as the passengers signal the rescue boat in the far distance. This not only engages the viewer but shows an emotional crescendo, but also a journey from death to life and a moral revival of despair to hope. The nude images give the men a timeless character, like that of neoclassical work. Eugene Delacroix. Delacroix preferred scenes of the past, fictional and the exotic. Dante and Virgil of 1822 was his Salon debut. It was inspired by the Divine Comedy by Dante Alighieri, and it depicts Dante and Roman poet Virgil on a boat being ferried through hell and purgatory across a lake. Souls damned to eternal drowning claw at the boat, trying to get on board. Scenes from the massacres at Chios from 1824 was one of the most contested paintings of the 1824 Salon. It was criticized for its formal qualities as well as its emphasis on agony and suffering. The subject is a scene from the Greek War of Independence in 1821 against the Ottoman Empire. Some 30,000 islanders of Chios were killed in the burnings of their villages, and thousands more were deported and enslaved. The painting is in line with the early 19th century ideals of freedom and nationalism. John Auguste Dominique Ingres. Grand Odalisque was painted in 1814 for Caroline Murat. This was shocking subject matter because it had no historical or mythological context, just simply a naked woman, and only prostitutes showed off their naked bodies. Ingres took artistic liberty in making her proportions askew, such as elongating her spine in order to bring out her essence as a harem woman, and classicists criticized that this was too much a departure from reality. This criticism prevented him from showing at any more salons until 1824. In conclusion, the Restoration period marks a split between classicism, which was taught in the academy and is conservative and orthodox, and Romanticism, which is the avant-garde, progressive, and modern.